Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for joining the latest Serviced Apartment News webinar. This is the first SAN webinar back after a short summer break. And today we're going to be talking about designing for flexibility. My name's Eloise Hanson. I'm going to be your host for today. And when I'm not hosting webinars, I am the editor of Serviced Apartment News. And we are an online trade publication that covers the global serviced apartment, apart hotel, and extended stay hotel industry. Our webinar series sponsor is The Residence, a luxury serviced apartment operator in London. And to introduce the brand, we have a short video to play for you today. If you would like to learn more about the Residence Apartments, details have been popped into the chat there. A brief overview of how today is going to play out. We'll spend around 45 minutes chatting with our panelists today, followed by some time at the end to take any questions from the audience. So I'm flagging now at the top end of this conversation. If anyone in our audience today has any burning questions, please submit these using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screens, and I'll do my best to get around to asking those as and when relevant. And as a reminder, this webinar is being recorded, and everybody that has registered will receive a copy of that recording within 2 days' time. So let's meet our panelists for today. And I'm going to move from left to right as per the PowerPoint slides, just to keep it all smooth and swift. So let's kick off with Ben. Welcome.
Hi, Eloise. Hi, everybody. Ben Harper. So I'm CEO of a new brand called SeaSpace Apart Hotels. It's part of a wider hospitality group. We have Watergate Bay Hotel in Cornwall, another place in the Lake District in Scotland, and we have Beach Streets, which is a self-catering agency. Been involved with this for the last 6 and a bit years, and previous to that I was commercial director at what was then Seiko, is now Eden, and was involved in the launch of the Lock brand some 8 or 9 years ago now.
Great to have you on, Ben. Thank you. Manuela, welcome. Over to you.
Hi, my name is Manuela Mannino. I am founder and partner of THDP. I'm Italian, and the company is based in London primarily, and we recently opened an office in Milan. We specialize in hospitality, and in the last 3-4 years, we also started to work on service apartments and apart hotels. We recently finished a project in Rome and Venice, and we are currently doing a project in Verona of 23 apartments, which are going to be managed by a large Italian hospitality group. So we don't actually work on residential projects, but we have our first background was residential. So now that we're working also on service apartments, it's very useful to have this kind of residential background to apply to the design.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you for joining us today, Manuela. And last but by no means least, James, over to you.
Thanks, Eloise. Hi, everyone. Hi, I'm James Allison. I'm an architect, associate director at Bennetts Associates Architects. I have led a mix of new build and adaptive reuse projects in a range of different sectors over the last 15 years or so, including the hospitality sector. And these have often been through the design and delivery stages for end user clients. Many of them have been pretty complex, with a focus on low carbon design. And as a practice, our vision really is for a resource conscious architecture, and we're kind of guided by the principles of doing more with less. So, we're very committed to leading the industry in the fight against the climate emergency. We've recently done a bit of research in and around hotels, the hospitality sector, and sustainability, and that's really informed our work in the sector and the recent design for kind of a hotel, a part hotel in central Manchester, which we recently got kind of planning approval on. So that's all good, and really happy to be part of the panel today and looking forward to the discussion.
Super. Thank you, James. And a quick note here to say that all the LinkedIn profiles of our speakers are in the chat. I do encourage you all to connect because we've got a lot to get through today, and I'm sure there'll be much to talk about long after today's webinar has finished. So to provide some context to today's topic, designing for flexibility, here are some stories that we've recently run on Service Department News. And the first is a report by HVS, which shows that service department profitability in Europe has returned to pre-pandemic levels driven by leisure demand. And whilst this has shortened the average length of stay, this means that operators are likely to be working harder in order to fill that occupancy gap. So when that customer base is changing, this will inevitably have an influence on the look and feel of service departments and apart hotels. Ironically, on the flip side of this conversation, Yotel's CEO Hubert Virio recently spoke to us about how the company's hotel customer base actually wanted to stay longer. And this is what prompted the launch of its extended stay product, Yotel Pad, which has just recently opened in London, Stratford. So as you can see, we're seeing the creation of new products in response to changing traveller needs, and similar with SeaSpace, which is Ben's new sort of apart hotel product, a new coastal brand, which is, I believe, due to launch next month. Keep your eyes peeled. On the next slide, as we recently heard from James, a landmark 32-story whole life net zero carbon tower has recently received planning permission in Manchester. And it's not just the sustainability angle that I wanted to flag here, which is having an impact on how we develop and design buildings. But this project in Manchester also will feature like an exhibition hall and museum, which brings in the mixed use element of developments. And a great example of how mixed use and designing for flexibility is being conceived. We recently had Zaki Ahmed on the SAN podcast, where he talked about bringing all the different brands under the Park Lane group. So this includes an apart hotel, a student housing, and a co-living platform, all under one roof. Funnily enough, this is also potentially happening in Manchester. So it appears that everything is going on in Manchester at this moment. And just to finish up here on this slide, Ascot is aiming to set new standards for accessible accommodation by introducing new inclusive spaces, digital interfaces, programs, and more across its portfolio. And the team's beginning first in Singapore, with plans to then look at how they can introduce these new standards globally. So there's lots to digest there. I hope that's helped to set the scene before we do dive in to talking about designing for flexibility. And I want to kick off with a question to James. You mentioned just a moment ago in your introduction that the team has run some internal research about how hotels and sustainability, but also how changing demographics and behavior might shape future design and functionality. So could you please share some of those key takeaways?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll try not to get too lost in the detail, keep things high level as I can. I mean, I think our research really looks into the challenges faced by the sector in terms of its footprint, which is a starting point. And I think we're aware that there's quite a significant challenge that the hospitality sector faces in terms of that. But also, as you alluded to in the question, Eloise, changes in market demand, particularly around consumer behaviours and demands. And we've identified a pathway through to low carbon design, net zero design. but that naturally encompasses kind of designing for flexibility and thinking about buildings over the long term. So I think what we've realized is there's a critical aim for the hotel sector, which is to kind of really think about designing truly sustainable buildings which are kind of resilient and cost effective, but really balancing that requirement with the needs of a range of different stakeholders. We're obviously aware that there's so many people and stakeholders involved with developing hotels, apart hotels, and so the needs of the investor, the kind of the operator, the owner, balancing their needs with the needs of the guest, obviously, and other building users. That's obviously very important. And I think we realize that more often than not, design solutions do need to be replicable and scalable as well, to make sure that they can be delivered as a part of company growth strategies and maintaining that brand identity, which is obviously very important to be consistent across different offers. So that's all things we've learned, and I think what we obviously have realized is there is a fairly significant challenge that the sector has to overcome, which is about global footprint. If you look at the kind of global tourism footprint, I think this is about 10% of global emissions. So I think that's kind of clear. And there's a kind of a certain acknowledgement from operators about how to approach that, and that every new development needs to satisfy their 2030 commitments in terms of carbon reduction. So that's important. I think hotels, I think they're around 1% of global emissions. So clearly it's showing the kind of the scale of the challenge, and kind of to limit but also reverse impacts where possible. But I think the transformation of the sector has also been driven, as we say, about kind of changes in the market. And I think environmental impact is quickly becoming the decisive factor for leisure and business travelers when selecting their kind of the place that they want to stay and spend some time. And that's obviously putting greater emphasis on the sector to embrace sustainability and to evidence the initiatives that they're putting in place to illustrate their progress. So, I mean, in terms of design, the way this shapes the design, I think we would normally advocate for kind of quite a holistic approach, which looks at a range of different factors, starting off with, processes such as procurement and design strategies. I think it's important that we think about making sure there's the right skills, the continuity of knowledge, continuity of project aim all the way through a project, because it's all well and good starting out with saying we want it to be this, and then the supply chain isn't unable to deliver it for one reason or another. Also really thinking about the specifics of the interiors, the way buildings are serviced, and thinking about simplicity in terms of M&E systems, passive systems. I think in terms of flexibility, looking at things like room proportion and options to reconfigure, to kind of look at long-term options for reuse. And quite clearly a very important aspect is the room accommodation itself. So from a sustainability, low carbon point of view, thinking about a focus perhaps on circularity, resource use, albeit not at the expense of comfort, because that's obviously a key consideration as well. But guest experience is really important. So thinking about how we can improve that within these constraints. So thinking about kind of, again, is a way in which we can improve the level of control, level of comfort. Simple things like openable windows, access to controls on heating and cooling, but maybe also more innovation in terms of how energy use is displayed in rooms to kind of broaden awareness, and hopefully drive lower reductions in terms of consumption. But I mean, I think that's it. I mean, it's kind of a starting point was to look at a pathway to net zero design, but there's actually natural overlap with designing for flexibility. And I think there's a lot to it, and I'd be happy to share more details, but that's probably a summary.
Yeah, if anybody wanted to find out more details about their research, James, how could they?
Well, it's on our website, which I think I can post a link if appropriate into this chat, so we can signpost people towards that. That's kind of a summary of a broader piece, but if there are any questions at the end, I'm more than happy to answer questions on that. But likewise, I'll put a link in the chat here, and if there's anyone interested, I'd be more than happy to kind of speak to them about it.
Brilliant. Thank you, James. Now, I made a light joke earlier that everything seems to be happening in Manchester, right? And we saw that the example that I gave was of a tower. Perhaps no surprise that in an urban and city environment that there are a lot of towers going up here. Manuela, let's bring you into the conversation. What are the key considerations for designing service departments when they are in urban environments that do have limited space?
For the experience that we had in big cities like especially Rome, but we also designed some senior living apartments in London. The key is rational design. The key is really at the beginning of the process is to look at the building in a kind of 360 degrees way to find opportunities for either social spaces or outdoor spaces. So all the kind of small areas that you can find, the ground level or rooftop area, are great for guests, for spending time when they relax in the apartments. So to have more the feeling of being in an environment that is not a hotel room. Also, it is important not to be carried away with the design concept in order to allow for the essential fit out of the apartment without overdoing it with a lot of furniture and a lot of FF&E or, heavy or big armchairs or, sofas that are difficult to move from one wall to the other. Also, in big cities, you have international tourists and they come with different kind of like itineraries. For example, in Italy, a lot of American tourists have, 2, 3 big suitcases each. So it's important for flexibility to allow in the apartment to have some extra wardrobe space, which could be used for housekeeping or, for storage of luggage. For example, in Venice, we had an apartment, we had a palace on the water, where, of course, for obvious reasons, we couldn't do storage of the luggage at ground level because of the water. And so we had to create some private storage spaces for the suitcases in the apartments. So we, no storage units for the check-in of guests. Also, for the local law, it's not possible for short-term apartments to have a concierge, to have a pod, to have any welcome aspect in the building. So it's also important that the check-in and check-out is hassle-free. So this also was a key element for the space planning. And in terms of more practical design, we have to consider when planning a kitchen, wardrobes, to think about, less clutter about around. And for example, rather than wall units to allow for shelves, to allow for maybe credenza with a lot of space to, charge the phone or putting cups and personal items. So not many accessories or decorations like you would do in a residential or even a hotel environment.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to expand this slightly more. I know you touched on the idea of local authorities and planning restrictions, which we'll come back to a bit later in the conversation. But we saw how leisure demand is now very much sort of on the up within the world of service departments, which have historically catered to the corporate traveller. And we're now seeing remote working and the rise of the bleisure traveller now coming in full force. So Manuela, how is this digital nomad, the remote worker, shaping your approach to designing apartments? What are the amenities that you're looking at, and you know, how are you making sure that space is maximized the right way to ensure that, you know, changing behaviors are also being considered?
Okay, I think that you know, service apartments traditionally, you know, were designed for executive or business people, not really for you know, leisure or families. But now this world is really like, you know, very fluid. So you have to imagine that you could have a family using the apartment, but also the same, or a group of friends, but also at the same time someone needs to be, you know, an hour in an online meeting. So you need to consider privacy for this, for meetings. So I think desks in bedrooms are having a comeback because, you know, a few years ago, it was like, okay, we don't need desks anymore because people work on the sofa or on the bed, but it's not like this anymore. People need to have, you know, privacy and a nice, clear space to work. So I think a desk is still very fundamental, but also, of course, to allow people to work on the sofa, on a dining table, or in bed. So we have to be very mindful of, you know, natural light, or having, you know, USB and electrical outlets near every single, you know, piece of FF&E that we are designing. And I think also to, of course, and sometimes, again, this is tricky in places, particularly for us working in Venice was a real challenge for, you know, Wi-Fi, you know, strong Wi-Fi. So for operators, it's very important to understand how the contracts for Wi-Fi, for electricity, for you know, all the kind of like outlets in the apartments will be managed. And again, Venice for us was a big challenge. It seems, you know, kind of an obvious like item to consider, but it was a real challenge for the operator.
Thanks, Manuela. We're now going to move from the city to the coast. Ben, what do you think that we can learn from urban apart hotel projects about the need for such flexible living spaces?
Everything. I mean, the whole vision was born out of what I learnt, what I've seen through urban apart hotel development. If we go back to when this category started to emerge within hospitality, say, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago, the vision was to blend the best of hotel with the best of corporate service department, or at that point, an emerging Airbnb. And we've translated that vision into a more leisure-focused coastal environment. And I suppose we're lucky because we run lifestyle hotels. We have a self-catering agency here in the southwest of the UK. So again, the analogy is the same. We're blending the best of lifestyle hotel with the flexibility and freedom of self-catering for predominantly the leisure market. I suppose one thing we're blessed with from a design perspective is that particularly for the first site that we've just finished developing here in Cornwall, is that we're blessed with space that from the conversations that have already happened on this call, urban developers don't necessarily have. So I think it's taking a slightly different approach to design. One specific of the SeaSpace brand is that community sits at its heart, and that's quite an overused phrase within hospitality these days, but we've been very true to that. So less specifically about how we've developed and designed the apartments, we've designed the whole site to connect with that vision. So we've been very generous with how much space we've given to community focused activities. So there's a huge amount of F&B space. There's a very large health club with a 20-meter pool, a very large gym studio, which was open to the community, a community membership of 400 to 500 people, which is quite unique in this market. We've given a great big plot to develop a paddle tennis court. So we've got the first 5-court paddle club in Cornwall. We have a 5-acre development site that we can get 25 independent lodges into. So it's a very different brief from a design perspective. But I suppose when you think about the master plan of the site, we are blessed with more space to play with, and it enables us to take this true community first. So everything we're designing is for the community, and the guest will come. But again, the vision of that isn't new. Again, when we were doing the Lock brand 9 years ago, the idea that we're creating F&B spaces and community focused a community focused environment to create vibe, to create this sense of community. Again, lessons from that, but translated into a coastal environment. We're very excited about it. We think we've landed on something that can scale, and SeaSpace Cornwall opens in 2 weeks' time.
2 weeks. So I said earlier this could be in October, but it could be late September.
Soft, very, very soft launch, 27th of September.
Oh, fantastic. Well,
that's the first time I've said that in public, so my team are gonna shoot me now.
I am recently in our service department newsletters that go out every week. I've talked about how operators might start to look more at those amenity spaces, and that there will be greater emphasis around communal areas and amenity spaces if that leisure traveller is going to be a more permanent staple within the world of service departments and apart hotels. Can you talk to us, Ben, about how that vision and that idea will translate commercially for these new projects? I suppose it's tapping into that mixed use angle.
Yeah, I mean, the fundamentals of a apart hotel don't change whether they be in a more leisure focused or coastal environment as SeaSpace is than it would in an urban environment. The segmentation might change slightly in the fact that we'll have a greater mix of leisure travelers, particularly through holiday periods. But I think the revenue streams are perhaps a little more balanced based on what I said previously, in the fact that the core revenue stream will be the rooms contribution, and again, hotel level occupancy and rate, but lower operational costs because we run a smaller team in an apart hotel as we would in a lifestyle full service hotel. So that instantly drives the commerciality of the business. But what's interesting about SeaSpace is that we have other different revenue contributors. So we have the fact that community sits at the heart of who we are and what we do, means that we're taking a partnership approach to our F&B. So we have a local craft beer led tap room, New York Italian style restaurant going in there. That's a commercial lease. We're not doing it ourselves. We want someone to come in to have skin in the game, to do it really authentically. So we have rental revenue coming in. We will build a large community of health club members. We're targeting 400 to 500. Again, another incredibly valuable revenue stream. We have bolt-on experiential stuff through things like the paddle club, which again, we've partnered. So there is revenue associated with that. So it's perhaps a little more revenue more balanced than a pure, it's all about the apartments and all about the rooms. However, the core contributor to the profitability of the apart hotel remains that room revenue, but we're taking again a community first sort of build it and they will come mentality, which is if we get that vibe, if we get that brand experience, if we get those community spaces really buzzing 12 months of the year, then people will come and stay. And it's almost a reverse psychology of the typical hospitality model.
When you were talking earlier, Ben, about sort of space and how the communal areas you've given a lot of, it's generous, I should say. We had a question come in around that time around what your gross/net ratio is. Do you know this figure?
No.
We will circle back to that one. I'll get in touch with Ben and I'm sure he can check in for you.
Give me 20 minutes and I can find out. But no, it's not a number that lands in my brain instantly, I'm afraid.
Worth a try, but
let me try and colour that a little bit. We've got 10 acres of real estate. Half half of that is the apart hotel, which will be 72 apartments. It will be a very generous cafe, a hosted space, and a 100 cover bar restaurant. So 80 covers in the cafe, 100 covers in the restaurant, a community and a health club, which includes a 20 meter pool, as well as a generous studio and gym. So that already sort of highlights the scale of this kind of ground floor community space that, again, urban developments would very seldom have.
On that note, we're kind of toing and froing here, the coastal versus urban, but I would like to touch on planning. And James, I'd like to bring you back in here.
Sure.
What are the key challenges and opportunities when it comes to obtaining planning permission for serviced apartment and apart hotel projects?
Well, I think obviously each situation is obviously very different, and I suppose the success is based on a variety of variables. With our Manchester scheme in mind, I mean, I think there's quite a lot of focus on the community functions as well as the blend of rooms we were creating. So I think, making it a destination building for a range of different uses, and as Ben suggests, kind of really integrating community uses in the building was something that the planners were very kind of keen on. So that was very important. But I mean, I think more generally, you need to have quite a convincing design. You need to be kind of be clear that you've thought about every single aspect of it, including the mix of uses. It needs to be really viable. It needs to stack up. And I think really importantly, demonstrating the level of commitment to seeing it through is really important, and working in collaboration with planners and seeing that it is an important part of the process to not only explain your proposals, but address any comments that come back. And that obviously helps build that relationship and trust. So it's quite multifaceted, but I think, Manchester for us was a big scheme. And I think the community functions in the project really helped enliven that and become kind of a viable proposition. But I think, we are seeing less in the way of absolute new build projects. I think, we're certainly seeing a move more towards a higher proportion of existing buildings being kind of converted into apart hotel and hotel use, which we are doing with Manchester. We're reusing a grade 2 listed building as well as a part of the offer. So that's quite an interesting kind of set of challenges, if you like.
Absolutely. It's something that we've been tracking for quite a while, that a route to market for a lot of urban city-based operators is within that adaptive reuse or conversion model. James, you touched on something earlier about I think you called it like a future resilient concept, right? And I want you to elaborate on this for me, please, because we were speaking on the phone that there is a difference between flexibility and adaptability. Can you explain the difference between the two and what you think will resonate favorably with the local councils?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think for us there is a subtle difference between flexibility and adaptability, and I think it's really important to understand the difference between the two, because you can ultimately end up with different outcomes. I mean, I think both are very important, and there is an ever-present need for flexibility and adaptability in all of the projects that we carry out. I mean, it's in all of our briefs, naturally, but I think the subtle difference is, obviously more flexible projects are those which can accommodate change perhaps more quickly, with relatively little cost or disruption. So maybe simple changes, less significant interventions, and perhaps reversible in time. Whereas I think adaptability is subtly different in so much that it offers greater potential for larger scale changes over a longer period. So without making kind of it too costly or too complicated, but they would naturally be more inbuilt kind of complex interventions, but potentially less reversible. But they do offer the potential to reimagine a building, change its use, and turn it into a new building which has a life beyond what it was originally designed for. So it might sound controversial. I know we're talking about designing for flexibility, but I mean, perhaps designing for adaptability could be considered more of a priority because of its longer term benefit. But it's kind of slightly different set of criteria to factor into the design process. Yeah, so I think that's kind of it. I mean, in terms of what would work well with local councils, I mean, I think a longer term view would probably work well. And so reusing existing buildings, kind of reimagining them, and those considerations, I think, in my view, would work well. But I think we need to work to kind of see a slight shift in the business as usual mindsets. New buildings have very much a place still, but I do think we should be shifting our mindset more towards an innovative approach to kind of bring existing buildings back to life more. I think as architects, members of project teams, we have that kind of key role to play. And, there's potential to design for adaptability, which is quite exciting.
Definitely. Ben, let's bring you back in here as our operator on the call. We've talked about these sort of multi-purpose projects and also multi-stays, I suppose, when you're looking at a shorter term stay, but also a longer term stay offering within one product or under one roof. So what operational challenges and opportunities, I would add, do you foresee in managing these types of products, developments, projects?
I mean, there's a couple of things to consider. One is that this is a relatively new concept for the UK leisure traveller, and helping that, it's going to be fascinating. I'm going to just sit in that site and watch for 2 weeks and listen, because what the expectation is around a coastal apart hotel, as we're talking about, versus what the guest sees and believes they are going to experience is again fascinating, and how much thought they've put into it, and whether it meets their expectations or otherwise. But that's more of a psychology thing, because I know the experience is going to hopefully connect with them both on a practical and emotional level. I think if you step back and think about what we're trying to achieve, which is this kind of community focused hub of activity that is beyond just somewhere where people come and stay, you could get quite scared about, the hotelier's mindset of, well, what are people going to do for breakfast, and can they book a table in the restaurant, and what happens if the gym's busy with members versus. And I've been careful to strip any fear away from that, because we've got to have absolute clarity and be brave, albeit think about capacity constraints and the way that we structure our memberships and the way that we do this and that and the other to avoid some of the challenges. But really, if we're authentic about this and true to it, then we've got to allow our partners, our F&B partners, to do their thing and not get in their way. With that, allow the space to behave in the way in which it was designed to behave, which is a coming together of different people doing different things at different times for different purposes. And I think that's the beauty of it. So I'm actually not worried about it at all. I think it'll settle. But again, we have to think operationally about making sure that we divert people to the right spaces at the right times of the day, so that we're not impacting on the guest experience.
I'm going to come back to you in a moment, Ben, to talk about the sort of tech infrastructure around that, because there's a lot of moving parts which will naturally need to speak together in order to make sure that those operations do flow smoothly. But sticking on the sort of design aspect for now, Manuela, how can design and space programming help to facilitate that really smooth and slick operator experience? Oh, Manuela, you're on mute.
Classic. Sometimes the design process is early to have the operator on board. Many times we work for the first 8, sometimes even more months with the investors, and then later on we have the operator. So you don't always have the investor with the right or more recent experience, or maybe you are dealing more with real estate kind of executives rather than hospitality managers. So it's very important to have the project very organized in terms of scheduling. So for us, is scheduling budgets and scheduling dividing finishes, FF&E and HOE. And it's important for us that these budgets are not fluid. They have to be set, especially the FF&E and the HOE, because many times in the process, money is great at the beginning, but less great at the end, like we all know. So we tend to have this approved very early on, and we also challenge the budget at the beginning. We ask for the budgets, and we ask for schedules, not just a figure. We ask for a breakdown of the budget. That this for us is fundamental in every project, but especially when you have to do a full fit out of a service apartment or a short-term rental. It's fundamental. And also together with the budget is fundamental to have schedules ready in order to remember everything that you need for a complete fit out of the apartment, because you don't have to I work in Italy more, but a cheese grater in Italy, or a coffee machine, or coffee cups and teacups and so on. So in the last project in Venice and Rome, we gave the apartment like a turnkey apartment, and it was very important to have this organized. We also tend not to go with the usual, calling a kind of a supplier and give us your schedule of everything. We tend to kind of design every item. We want to be size specific. So for Venice, we might have a cutlery, and for Rome, we might have another. And we like to also add local touches, like, a particular, not maybe for everything, of course, you can't, have a design showroom, but we like to have maybe a nice teacup or coffee cup, a vintage kettle, or a nice coffee machine, and so on. The other important thing is, of course, housekeeping, and again, here, it sounds obvious, but to really remember about materials and durability, the possibility to be clean very easily. And now, for example, if I imagine taps and PVD is one thing that is now, before you just specified chrome tap, but now you have to imagine what's the life of this item, what's the usage, what's the maintenance. And so for some environments, we now do stainless steel PVD, even if it is more expensive, but it's a lot easier to maintain and clean. Because if it is a brass PVD, sometimes, housekeeping doesn't really take care of this properly, and in 2 weeks is maybe, scratched or ruined. And also, again, rubbish collection and storage for us are fundamental. It was funny in this project in Venice. We went after the project was finished to do the photo shooting, and we saw these big sacks of rubbish, and the operator told us, they leave the rubbish, in the staircase. Some people do this, and we did this beautiful staircase with a Fortuny chandelier, amazing details, and then everything was ruined by these rubbish bins outside the door. So to keep in mind these small housekeeping, very important details is crucial.
Thank you. Some definitely food for thought there. And James, is there anything that you would add to this?
Well, I'd absolutely agree with kind of making sure there's enough space for kind of cleaners, cupboards, and housekeeping. I think that's naturally, when looking at layouts, you tend to try and squeeze those areas a little bit to give more to the rooms, but they are a very kind of important aspect of making everything kind of work smoothly. I mean, I think, from a very strategic high level point of view, I think it's really important to think, it's easier said than done, think a little bit ahead if you can. I mean, we're all very focused on every project to deliver the brief that is directly in front of us. And that's obviously kind of our first kind of goal. But I do think it's important that we think about longer term uses and how spaces may well be used in future. So it's back to that point again about thinking about how a building functions holistically, thinking about its longevity. And as I say, it is easier said than done, but it does make more sense to think about long-term needs as opposed to the immediate needs, if you can. If there's a conversation that a client is willing to have about potential use in future, then it's a great opportunity to try and factor some of that into your initial design thinking. But it is very difficult, and sometimes anticipating changes is near on impossible. Some things such as social trends, technological advancements, they just are not foreseeable, no matter how hard you try. So there's a challenge that obviously exists with it, but it's maybe more about an approach on an individual basis.
Yeah, if I can add just a little bit of a detail to what I was saying before, is that we considered rubbish bins under the sink, but the problem is that when we planned the kitchen, although the kitchen was quite compact, we put a combi oven and a hob and stuff, but in the end people just order out. So that's why the collection of rubbish was massive big sacks rather than small bags, and the way people live now and travel is very different from a few years back, and the same applies in hotel rooms, when some people just order from Just Eat and so on, and want everything delivered almost to their room. So it's very different now.
I'd like to move the conversation on to touch on technology, because that is an increasingly important topic, especially when it comes in design, development, architecture, especially when you think of sustainability, right? Staying with you, Manuela, what role is technology currently playing in the look and feel of apartments and apart hotels?
At the moment, I am looking at I'm studying and looking at the application of Wi-Fi electrical outlets, because for switches, of course, because they will add flexibility to the design process. Because of course, if you have to move something from one wall to the other or so on, you have the possibility to use the Wi-Fi switches, but also voice commands for control of switches, television, and music. So it's very important that you plan this in a way that everything is integrated. And so we tend to make an effort to include, for example, domotic system and DALI systems in lighting, not because you can do scenarios from the switches, but because voice control is going to be, near future for this. And of course, more obviously, to have interactive technologies also for having meetings wherever you are in the apartment is very important, even in the outdoor. So it's crucial.
I think the tech may need to do a bit of catching up to get to that stage. And I say this lightly in that I have been in a voice automated apartment and nothing worked.
No,
So
yeah,
there is some investments, and the tech does need
yes.
to get there first,
Yeah.
for sure. But speaking of those like innovative solutions, Manuela, like, have you seen anything that's quite surprising or creative that does help support those flexible and adaptable spaces and experiences?
Well, I think it's probably applicable more in the kind of wellness department rather than the business or the working department. So I think using technology to enhance the wellness in apartments through sound, lighting. This, I think, is something that we are also studying. Of course, we design hotels more than apartments. So in hotels you tend to push a lot more with novelties if you want, but I can see this happening quicker in the wellness department rather than in the kind of like lifestyle, if you want, department. So for me, the possibility to have sounds or lights or not just the RGB, because it's quite boring now and quite cheap, but more sophisticated ways of having lights interaction, and especially sounds and music interactions. I think it's very interesting, and even scents, and in order to create a very relaxing environments in the apartments and bathrooms.
I think to be flexible in that respect means to be customizable.
It's also integrated in FF&E. I was in the Maison Objet recently in Paris, and I tried two pieces of technologies, and one was an armchair where you could actually sit in this armchair, which had a kind of a cover, a canopy, and you could listen to music without having any earphones, but no one outside of this armchair could listen to the music or sounds. And also there was a sort of a reclining armchair where you could lie down and close your eyes, and you had fractals projected in your eyes, and you had the feeling of flying, floating actually, and it was amazing. An amazing experience, and you could just do it instantly. You didn't need time to kind of like wind down. It was instant. So I found this very, very inspiring for my projects.
Awesome. Two great examples there. Thank you, Manuela.
No problem. Thank you for having me and THDP.
Thank you. And Ben, finally, I want to finish up with understanding a bit more about how technology is going to be used or utilized at SeaSpace, and how do you see technology as playing a role in ensuring that guests do have that personalized, customizable and flexible experience?
Yeah, I think the way I look at technology as a non-technology expert is that it has to connect to brand and your vision for your brand and the guest experience that you're trying to create. And SeaSpace is very much around, I suppose, a few words, but accessible but aspirational. So we are targeting a upscale but mainstream market. And the concept of the lifestyle apart hotel is around a community first blend of hotel and independence of self-catering. So the way I look at technology is, and there are challenges within that, right? So I think you talked to this point earlier, which is we have 3 or 4 very key partners within the mix at SeaSpace in Cornwall. To get that technology to talk to each other would take hundreds of thousands of pounds and a lot of very clever people. So let's just fess up to it. Let's just lean into that and say, this is about delivering a suite of experiences. And if you have to go to other people to book certain parts of it, that's life, but we will curate that and explain that and help you understand that. So, for example, if you want to book a paddle tennis court, we can help you, but we're going to send you off to our paddle partner to be able to do that, albeit we'll do that in a very seamless and and smart way. I think from a SeaSpace perspective, I don't see necessarily innovation at the heart of it, albeit I'd like to think about it as just really a hygiene factor. So to deliver on this spirit of independence, a great platform that will allow you to check in before you arrive and be served an electronic key code. Great. A great hospitality TV that allows you to cast your own from your own device rather than mess about with 75 different channels. A really great messaging service so that you can talk to one of our team in a way that you feel right. Great membership technology, which talks to your point around personalization. So the platforms that we're using are best in class and allow for a very personalized, the CRMs on the back of these platforms are best in class and allow for that personalized service. So I don't have smart, exciting, for want of a better word, gimmicky technology examples, but it should just be kind of felt but not necessarily seen. And my worst nightmare as a guest and someone running a hospitality business is that you walk into somewhere that's trying to be too clever and the thing doesn't work. So let's just stick to the basics and get them really good.
I couldn't agree more. Thank you, Ben. We have effectively 2 minutes on the clock. I want to take this opportunity to say thank you to Ben, to Manuela, and to James for their time and insights today. We're going to leave this webinar open right at the end to allow our audience members to follow up on any of the links that we have popped into the chat. So flagging here once again that the LinkedIn profiles of all the speakers have been popped into the chat earlier. I do encourage you all to connect and carry on that conversation after today has finished. So just to bring up some closing slides before I say goodbye. We were just talking about technology. The next service department news webinar taking place on October the 17th is called Monetizing the Guest Journey with Technology. We would love to see you all there. The link to register has been popped into the chat. And this time next week, we will be in full swing at the Urban Living Festival. And again, today we've talked about hotels, apart hotels, senior living, maybe a bit of co-living in there. This event brings together all the hospitality and operational real estate asset classes under one roof. There is a whole day's agenda dedicated to just the hotel and hospitality sectors. And once again, we would absolutely love to see you there in person, taking place in London at King's Cross. So tickets are on sale. Please buy your tickets. And again, we would love to see you there. And if you're interested in working with us, either across our digital events, such as this webinar, or our in-person events, like the Urban Living Festival, please do get in touch with my colleague, Emily. Her details are up on your screens. And all that's truly left for me to do now is to say thank you once again to our panelists. Thank you to the residents for their continuing support of these webinars. Wish you all the best of days. It's slowly starting to get a bit sunnier here in London, but thanks again for tuning in, and I look forward to seeing you all very soon. Take care, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Hello, we are International Hospitality Media, or IHM for short. IHM is the #1 brand to engage with decision makers in hospitality and real estate. Our 4 multimedia brands lead their respective sectors with breaking news, comments, trends, and opinions across a variety of multimedia solutions. We provide an inspirational community to connect people through world-class events, webinars, podcasts, award schemes, and much more. But let us share our story of who we are and what we do. Over 10 years ago, Piers and George had a light bulb moment to provide expert opinion, comments, and low-cost digital content. And so, they went on a journey over the past decade, creating media platforms to serve the hospitality and real estate industries. We now have an engaged audience with a reach of over 60,000 monthly visitors across our website, 52,500 in our email database across all sectors, and over 68,000 across our social channels. Everything we do challenges the status quo. We believe in thinking differently. We make things simple and very easy to work with us, and we're a friendly bunch too. We offer creative solutions to help you achieve your business goals. Read, watch, listen, and meet with IHM. Connect with us for a chat today. Just look at some of the brands we have worked with recently.